7 long years ago, a youngster in California vanished.
I'm begging you, bring me home.
Bring her home safe. There's a $50,000 reward. Bring her home.
More than 600,000 people go missing every year in America alone, and only several hundred find their way back home. These people are nothing short of a miracle story. After disappearing in unusual circumstances, some missing persons have made their shocking reappearance, and their stories yield more questions than answers.
Not such a safe world anymore. I know that I'm going to wake up crying, very upset. Every day he threatened to kill me. Every day.
Join us as we explore the stories of 15 people who disappeared and reappeared in strange and mysterious ways. Number 15. Sherry Papini. On the 2nd of November 2016, Keith Papini returned to his home from Best Buy to find his wife, Sherry, missing. It was common for Sherry to drop their 2 kids at daycare and then go for a run around the woods in Redding, California. But that day, she had failed to return from her jog. Keith used the Find My iPhone feature to locate her phone and earphones at the intersection of Sunrise Drive and Old Oregon Trail, about a mile from their home. Everything about her last known location was unusual. It dawned on Keith that his wife was missing.
And I didn't get home until around 5 o'clock. That was like, something is wrong.
For the next 3 weeks, police carried out multiple searches for Sherry. However, there were no clues to be found. Then something bizarre happened. 3 weeks after her alleged kidnapping, Sherry was seen running for her life at 4:30 in the morning on County Road 17 near Interstate 5 in Yolo County, almost 240 kilometers from her last known location. The police couldn't believe their eyes. It had turned out that Sherry's captives, after torturing and starving her, had released her from their captivity willingly. When she was found running on the roads, her restraints were still on. Sherry was almost unrecognizable. Sherry was beaten and bruised. Her hair had been cut off, and she only weighed 40 kilograms.
There was boards on the window. There was a chain around my waist, a metal cable.
According to her story, she was kidnapped by 2 Hispanic women in a black SUV. The captives had taken her to an unknown location and kept her blindfolded most of the time. In the process, they had injured her foot too. There were multiple holes in Sherry's story, though. Why did the captors let her go? Why was the DNA found on her belonged to a man and a woman? If her foot had suffered an injury, how was she seen running on the road? Sherry's kidnapping seemed like a hoax from the very beginning. This is why a common case of kidnapping had to be dealt with by the FBI, who discovered something extremely sinister about Sherry Papini. The woman was never kidnapped. All of her injuries were self-inflicted. She had gotten tired of her mundane life, her husband and the kids, so she had run away to spend time with her ex-boyfriend. No wonder she was jailed for 18 months after pleading guilty to planning a hoax and wasting the precious time of the police and FBI. Number 14. Brenda Heist. Brenda Heist was your regular mother of 2 when she shockingly disappeared from her home in 2002. She had dropped off her kids at school, came back to prepare dinner, and even had the laundry going when she disappeared without a trace. Even after months of investigation, there was no trace of Brenda, except for her car, which was found parked at a nearby bus station. The key suspect in the case was Key Heist, who was planning on divorcing Brenda after their marriage had broken down. But the police couldn't find any evidence against him, and Lee was let go. In 2010, Brenda was declared dead. So you can only imagine the surprise of Key Largo police when a woman with a striking resemblance to Mrs. Heist turned herself in for forgery and fraud. The police were shocked to find her in the missing persons directory. It turned out that Brenda had applied for a house loan at her workplace to sustain herself and her kids after the divorce. But the request was denied. She went to a park to calm herself down, but couldn't stop crying. That's when 3 homeless hitchhikers tried to console her and offered her a place in their group. And the rest was history. Apparently, Brenda spent most of her life living under the bridges and eating from trash cans. But new evidence suggests that she was keen enough to fake multiple identities to work as a live-in housekeeper for lavish homes in Florida. She would tell her bosses sob stories about a dead husband and an abusive boyfriend to garner their sympathy and secure her employment. Everyone fell for her convoluted tales and didn't do much to run a background check on her.
Maybe seen them on the street sometimes, but I've never been around homeless people at all. I don't know that I've ever stopped crying and started living, to be honest with you.
During this time, Brenda also stole multiple identities to keep up with her gimmick. And her family has no wish to regain contact with her. Number 13, Petra Pazitka. In 1984, a 24-year-old Petra failed to show up to her brother's birthday party. Her parents waited on her for hours until they had to contact the police. What followed was a massive search for Petra, which didn't yield any outcome. The German television ran headlines and headlines about the girl's disappearance. Then, something horrifying happened. A man who was a suspect in the murder and assault of a teenager rang up the police with a hot tip that left everyone shocked. After all, he had confessed to Petra's murder. The Pazitka family was distraught. They couldn't even mourn their daughter because no remains were found. Until a mundane case of robbery in 2015 changed everything. A woman who identified herself as Mrs. Schneider called the police after someone broke into her house. When police asked for an ID, she was forced to confess that her documentation was false and that her name was Petra Pazitka. For years, she had assumed multiple fake names and was able to build a life for herself. Much to her family's dismay, she had no plans to get in touch with them. No one knows what happened to her on the night of her disappearance. Number 12, Judith Bellow. In 1993, Judith, a resident of Stanwood, Washington, was scheduled to pick up her 2 children from the daycare, but never showed up. Her car was found abandoned in the middle of nowhere. The investigation of her disappearance went cold soon enough, and she was feared dead. Then, 18 years later, a member of the Bellow family informed the police that she had been found. In fact, Judith had called her former sister-in-law herself when she found herself being profiled on a deck of cards for a missing persons case. Her family was shocked to know that in all these years, she was living a life of her own. She had a new husband, 3 kids, and a house in a nice neighborhood. She had only decided to make a run when her former husband had become highly abusive towards her. Finding herself trapped in a bad marriage, she decided to make a run. Number 11, Jody Roberts. Foul play, or a rare case of amnesia. On May 25, 1985, a police officer in Aurora, Colorado received a very strange call. A security personnel in the local mall had a potential mental patient in custody. The woman, who must have been in her mid-20s, seemed harmless, but couldn't remember anything about her life. She didn't have an ID that could trace her name or where she lived. All she had was an empty notepad and some car keys. The police admitted her to a hospital in the hopes of finding her family. For the next 4 months, local news channels ran her story. The police put up flyers too, but no one showed up to help her. Eventually, she moved to Alaska, gave herself a new name, Jane D., and started a new life. Then 12 years later, her life changed once again when a local channel in Seattle ran a news segment about the reopening of some old missing persons case. One of the people who was watching the news was Madeline Wright, who had worked alongside Jane as a waitress in Alaska in 1989. She instantly knew that her former co-worker had gone missing all those years ago. That's when she got in touch with the police and informed them about Jane, who had started a new life in Alaska with her husband and 4 little daughters. It was later revealed that Jane's real name was Jody Roberts, and she used to work as a reporter for the News Tribune of Tacoma. So how did a well-functioning woman suddenly forget the first 27 years of her life? It is speculated that Jody was suffering from amnesia when she went missing in 1985. A traumatic event must have prompted her to forget about her life and lose all of her memories. However, doctors who have studied the case believe that there's more to the story than a simple explanation of amnesia. No matter what the movies and books tell us, A person can't forget all of their memories in one go until they suffer from underlying issues such as epilepsy. And you guessed it, Jody didn't suffer from any severe medical issues. So, what do you think is her story? Number 10. Bakreddin Kakimov. After the Soviet troops decided to withdraw from Afghanistan in 1989, all of their soldiers were accounted for, except for one. Bakreddin Kakimov had been wounded in a battle, after which he was tended by the locals. And then he was never found. His family mourned his death, and his nation thanked him for his service. But then, a veteran organization revealed something disorienting. A man named Sheikh Abdullah, who was living in Herat, looked awfully similar to Kakimov. Turns out, the soldier decided to stay back, converted to Islam, and found love. He had no plans to return to his family. Number 9. Bo Bergdahl. This story is an odd one. Bo Bergdahl, a U.S. soldier, was stationed in Afghanistan in 2009 when one day he had decided to leave his military post. From the very beginning of his duty, Bo was known to be antisocial but loyal to his peers. In particular, he had gotten close to First Lieutenant Brian Bradshaw, who was killed in a roadside bomb planted by the Taliban. That had made Bo very skeptical of the United States Army. Before he deserted his post, Bo wrote an explosive email to his parents, stating the title of U.S. soldier is just the lie of fools. The emails indicate that Bo had started to criticize the military for its treatment of Afghan citizens, and the delusion of his job made him desert the post. The military had assumed him to be missing and dead until he appeared in a video clip, the very same clip that the Taliban had sent to the United States to demand the release of 6 of their leaders held captive. Over the course of time, Bo appeared in 5 videos, demanding the release of the Taliban leaders in exchange for his life.
Release me, please. I'm begging you. Bring me home, please.
In 2014, the United States arranged for the release of Bo Bergdahl after transferring the Taliban leaders to Qatari custody. It is still unclear how the soldier was captured by the Taliban. Multiple stories surround the incident, including speculation that Bo wanted to settle in Pakistan forever, or worse, join terrorist organizations. However, no such evidence was found. Bo was eventually discharged from the military after sitting his court-martial for deserting his peers. Number 8. Steve Carter. Steve Carter always knew that he was adopted by his mother from an orphanage in Honolulu, but despite trying his best, he didn't know anything about his birth parents. When it came down to having kids of his own, Steve tried to dig into his past again. According to CNN, he was inspired by the story of Carlina White, an Atlanta woman who had found herself to a missing persons website after years of being adopted. She had discovered that, as an infant, she was stolen by a hospital nurse. That story inspired Steve to go on a missing persons directory too, and you can probably guess what happened. On the website, he tracked down records from 3 decades ago where he found an age progression image made from a photograph of him as an infant.
What happened? I was adopted. I was put in an orphanage at 6 months and was adopted at 4, so, I knew I was adopted.
The baby also had a name, Marks Panama Moriarty Barnes. Upon contacting the Honolulu Police Department, Steve found out that he had gone missing when his mother, Charlotte, went for a walk and never returned. His dad, Mark, had searched desperately for him but couldn't find any trace of him. Steve doesn't know if he was snatched as a baby or if Charlotte gave him up, but he is glad to find his biological dad and relatives. Number 7. Timothy Carney. On September 28, 2004, 25-year-old Timothy Carney texted his employer that he was going to be late for work, but then he never showed up. Later, his car was found abandoned on the side of the road at the border of Elizabeth and Newark. The last person to see Timothy alive was his roommate, Roy Anthony, who allegedly had no involvement in the case. After 7 years of his disappearance, police officially took out Timothy's name from the missing person database. In all those years, he was alive and well. And nope, this is another case of starting a new life. If anything, Timothy might have been a victim. His parents, as well as the Kristen Foundation, who took up his missing person case, believed that Carney found a new religion, quite literally. Both Timothy and Roy were staunch members of the Gospel Outreach, which is notorious for its cult-like practices. Timothy's parents were always suspicious of the organization. They knew that the leadership had absurd rules for their followers, including distancing themselves from their family members. Before his disappearance, Timothy had struggled to visit his sick aunt in the hospital because the gospel leader wouldn't let him go anywhere without his company. The leader thought his disciple was lying about his aunt being sick and wanted to confirm himself. The Christian Foundation has requested the police to look into the religious organization because it might have orchestrated Timothy's disappearance in 2004. However, Timothy has no plans to stay in touch with his family. Number 6. Stephen Stainer. Stephen was only 7 years old when he was kidnapped by a man posing to be a church representative in 1972. The child was walking home from schooling when Irvin Murphy, a brainwashed accomplice of pedophile Kenneth Parnell, asked him for church donations. Since the Stainer family would routinely donate items to the church, Stephen agreed to walk home with Murphy. While walking, Stephen was abducted by Parnell, who convinced him that his parents had given him up for adoption as they were poor. It is unclear if Stephen ever bought that story, but for the next 7 years, he lived as Parnell's son. Throughout this time, he was mistreated, forced into alcoholism, and even tried to kidnap more kids for his abductor. But on purpose, he kept sabotaging the plans. During these hard years, Parnell would leave Stephen alone at home while he did menial jobs. But the child found himself unable to run from his captor until Parnell's next big kidnapping in 1980. The abductor had brought home a 5-year-old Timothy White from Ukiah and had instructed Stephen to take care of him like his brother. Seeing Timothy distraught and scared, Stephen knew he had to do what he couldn't years ago. While Parnell was at work, Stephen took Timothy and ran from their house. On their way, a truck driver gave them a ride to Timothy's hometown, where the duo contacted the police. The law enforcement was quick to act. Since Parnell had a previous record, the police had no doubts that Stephen was telling the truth. It was the bravery of the teenager that saved 2 lives that day, one of Timothy and then one of himself. Later, Timothy would become a policeman in honor of Stephen, his savior. Number 5. Gabriel Nagy. It was a hard day for Gabriel Nagy in 1987. His afternoon had been occupied with running errands, so he called up his wife, Pamela, and asked her to make something delicious for lunch. Pamela and their 2 children waited on Gabriel for hours, but he never showed. The family contacted police, who after searching for hours, found Gabriel's car. The vehicle had burned down at the side of the road, with no traces of its driver. The initial hunch was that the man was severely injured and must be in some hospital. The search turned out to be a dead end, but the police did stumble upon a weird detail. Gabriel had withdrawn money far, far away from his home after his disappearance. Then all the tracks went cold. 2 decades later, the police department had to classify Gabriel Nagy as no longer alive, but before they could do that, they gave the case another try. Senior Constable Georgia Robinson found a hospital record of a man named Ron Saunders, who usually went by a name that was pretty familiar to her. You guessed it, Ron had a second name, Gabriel Nagy. Robinson quickly got in touch with the mystery man and found out his real identity. Gabriel had little to no recollection of his life. He was mostly homeless and did odd jobs to survive. He did appear to have a major head injury that possibly came from his car accident. It seemed like a normal case of amnesia, but it was also odd. How come Gabriel remembered his real name? And why hadn't he tried to find his real family? While he was reunited with his wife and kids, nothing about his story and his disappearance adds up. Number 4. Tanya Koch. It was a typical day for the grocery store owner, Joe Sparico, on March 21, 2006, when her regular customer, Nikki Allen, walked in. It was a common occurrence for Nikki to show up to Joe's store, and throughout this time, the duo had become friendly. But that day, Nikki wasn't alone. She was accompanied by a man who looked old enough to be her father. As soon as the mystery man got busy with buying groceries and was out of earshot, Nikki quickly turned to Joe to whisper something so terrifying that it would change him forever. She had only uttered 3 words. "I'm Tanya Koch." Anyone who lived in the 2 in McKeesport, Pennsylvania, knew that Tanya was a 14-year-old girl who had disappeared in 1996. She had gone to school like she usually would, but never returned home. All investigations into her alleged kidnapping had gone cold. Her father had given up on the search too. What he didn't know was that his daughter was held captive only a few blocks away from home in the residence of 48-year-old Thomas Hose, the same man Joe had seen in his grocery store. Joe quickly called the police at Thomas's house, and he was revealed to be the security guard who had worked in Tanya's school. The guard had groomed the 8th grader to be his girlfriend, and one day, he convinced her to run away with him. Tanya soon realized that her relationship with Thomas was not normal. She wasn't allowed to leave his bedroom for the first 4 years of her captivity. Shockingly, she was kept in the same house where Thomas's son and parents lived, but he went to great lengths to hide Tanya from his family.
Not such a safe world anymore. I know that I'm going to wake up crying, very upset. Every day he threatened to kill me. Every day.
When she turned 17, he introduced her as his girlfriend, but no one bothered to call out their odd age gap. It was also speculated that the Hose family knew Nikki was a captive, but didn't inform the police. Later, Thomas was sent to jail, thanks to Joe's quick action. Number 3, Carlos de Salazar. A doctor from Spain named Carlos de Salazar took peace and serenity too seriously when he decided to leave his family behind, forever. At the age of 26, Dr. Carlos disappeared from his town in 1996 while he was practicing as a doctor. He was so unhappy with his life that he came up with a rather unusual plan. He left his family behind and moved to the mountain in Italy, where he was discovered by 2 mushroom pickers decades later. Carlos showed them an old passport which indicated that he was very far from home and living further away as a hermit. The mushroom pickers immediately contacted the missing persons organization in Italy, but by the time they got to Carlos's last known location, he had moved on. Even after a long-haul search, he wasn't found again. Number 2, Lula Gillespie Miller. In 1974, a 28-year-old Lula gave birth to her 3rd child. Known to be a free spirit, she wasn't always keen on having children, and when she had her 3rd child, she knew it was time to take off. She signed off her 3 children, including her newborn, to her parents, and then just disappeared in plain sight. For a year or so, her parents searched for her desperately. They hired independent detectives to find their daughter. A year after her alleged kidnapping, Lula's children received a letter, postmarked Richmond, Indiana, from their mother. While the contents of the letter are unknown, the family had hoped that Lula would return. But nope, like a ghost, she disappeared once again. 42 years later, Indiana State Police Detective Sergeant Scott Jarvis took on the case once again after a missing persons organization, the Doe Network, made a special request. That's when Jarvis hunted down a lead of a woman who looked awfully like Lula and had lived in Tennessee in the 1980s, and later, Texas. When Jarvis matched the woman's DNA with Lula's daughter Tammy, it was a perfect match. Turns out, Lula never had any plans to return home, but was glad to be reconnected with her children. Number 1, Stephen Kubacki. Amnesia, an alien kidnapping, brainwashing, and possible time travel. All of these wild theories surround Stephen Kubacki, who is today known for his study in clinical psychology. Back in February 1978, he was known to be an avid outdoorsman who knew Lake Michigan like the back of his head. This is why it was super odd when Stephen disappeared while he was on his cross-country solo skiing trip around Lake Michigan. It was a very chilly day on February 21st. Snowmobilers found a pair of skis and a backpack lying in the ice. Next to the items was a trail of footprints that dragged on for 200 yards. The trail disappeared at the edge of the frozen lake. After all, there was no returning trail found. The snowmobilers instantly knew tragedy had struck. The owner of the skis and the backpack had probably fallen into the thin ice and couldn't find his way back up. Upon their reports, a long, desperate air and land search was triggered for Stephen Kubacki. Nothing about his disappearance seemed right. The college senior knew how to deal with low temperatures and thin ice. So, what had gone wrong? The investigation was pretty thorough, but Stephen wasn't found. The search had to be stopped. The Kubacki family was about to lose hope when they got a weird call. The person on the line was none other than their son, Stephen, who was calling from a payphone. After 15 months of his disappearance, Stephen slowly made his way to his house, where he reunited with his family. There was not a single scratch on his body. Stephen had talked about waking up in Pittsfield, almost 1,000 kilometers away from his last known location, in clothes he didn't recognize. His memories from the last 15 months were pretty hazy. He knew who he was, but didn't know what had happened to him. The police didn't find any record of Stephen hopping onto any public transport either. For the Kubacki family, the details didn't matter though. Although there were indications that he might have been on drugs, Stephen simply wanted to move on with his life. Today, he appears on several documentaries and TV shows to talk about his bizarre kidnapping. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.